Montana Territory, 1875. The creek water rushed around Garrett Calloway's boots as he knelt by the shallow bend, filling his canteen. At 25, he'd spent nearly a decade on his own in this unforgiving country, learning that solitude was the only certainty a man could count on. The late afternoon sun beat down on his broad shoulders as he stood, adjusting the worn Stetson that shaded his face. His ranch, if you could call it that, a modest cabin with a small corral and 40 acres of decent grazing land, lay just beyond the ridge. It wasn't much, but it was his. No debts, no partners, no complications. Just the way he preferred it. A man ties himself to others, he's asking for heartache, Garrett muttered to himself, a habit born of too many nights alone. His father had taught him that lesson early, before consumption took both his parents within months of each other when he was 16. The orphan boy had buried them on the Kansas homestead, sold everything that wouldn't fit in his saddlebags, and headed west. Garrett adjusted his gun belt, the worn leather as familiar as his own skin. He wasn't a gunslinger, never had been, but a man alone needed to be prepared. His face, despite the harshness of his life, remained youthful, marked only by the weathering of sun and wind. His light stubble framed a strong jawline and deep-set eyes that had seen more trouble than a young man should. The distant sound of gunfire jerked his attention toward the horizon. 3 shots, then silence. In frontier country, gunfire meant either hunting or trouble. The pattern and timing suggested the latter. Garrett hesitated only briefly before swinging onto his mare. Trouble wasn't his business, he'd learned to keep to himself, but something pulled him toward the sound. "Let's go, Sadie," he urged his horse. The mare responded immediately, carrying him at a gallop through the pines and over the rolling meadow beyond. As he crested a hill, he saw smoke rising from the direction of the stage road. His instincts screamed to turn back. Whatever waited over that rise wasn't his concern. He'd built his life around staying clear of other people's problems. Yet something made him continue forward, against every principle that had kept him alive and independent these past 9 years. The stagecoach came into view first, tilted awkwardly where it had rolled partway into a ditch. One horse lay dead in its traces, the others gone. Then he saw the bodies, 2 men, one face down near the coach, the other sprawled beside the road. Garrett drew his revolver as he approached cautiously. Road agents had been hitting stages throughout the territory. The smart move would be to check for survivors and then ride for the nearest settlement to report the robbery. No more complications than necessary. He dismounted, keeping his eyes on the surrounding hills for signs of the attackers. The driver was dead, a bullet hole in his chest. The other man, dressed in a fine suit now stained with blood and dust, had taken a shot to the abdomen. Garrett knelt beside him, surprised to find shallow breathing. "Mister, can you hear me?" The man's eyes fluttered. "My wife, the children, please." "What children? Where are they?" Garrett scanned the area, seeing no one else. The dying man clutched at Garrett's sleeve with surprising strength. "She ran, took them into the trees. When the shooting started," he coughed, blood speckling his lips. "Find them." "Promise me." Garrett felt the weight of the request like a physical burden. "I'll look for them," he said, not committing beyond that. The man fumbled inside his coat, pulling out a folded document and pressing it into Garrett's hand. "This deed, our new home in Helena. Tell Rebecca. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't." His words faded as his grip went slack, eyes staring sightlessly at the Montana sky. Garrett closed the man's eyes, tucking the deed into his own pocket. He stood and surveyed the surrounding forest. If a woman and children had fled into those trees, they wouldn't have gone far. "Hello," he called out, moving toward the tree line. "Anyone there? It's safe to come out now." Only silence answered him. The sensible thing would be to ride for the nearest town. Twin Bridges was less than 2 hours away, and report the attack. The sheriff could organize a proper search. These people weren't his responsibility, yet the dying man's plea echoed in his mind. Garrett sighed and began searching the ground for tracks. Near the edge of the trees, he found them, small boot prints and what appeared to be a woman's footprints, heading deeper into the forest. Following the trail, he moved cautiously through the pines. A mile in, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of a child crying. The noise led him to a small clearing where a young woman stood with her back against a tree, a revolver trained directly at his chest. One arm cradled a baby no more than 6 months old, while a toddler of perhaps 2 years clutched at her skirts, tears streaming down his face. "Stop right there," she commanded, her voice surprisingly steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. Not one step closer. Garrett raised his hand slowly. I'm not here to hurt you, ma'am. I found the stagecoach. The woman was young, no more than 22 or 23, with hair the color of rich walnut cascading in loose waves around her shoulders. Her dress, once fine but now torn and mudded, suggested someone of means. Despite her disheveled state, her beauty was striking, all the more so for the fierce determination in her posture as she protected the children. My husband, she asked, though something in her eyes suggested she already knew the answer. I'm sorry, ma'am, him and the driver both. The revolver wavered slightly, but she steadied it. How do I know you weren't with them? The men who attacked us. You don't, Garrett said honestly, but I've got a horse not far back and I can take you to Twin Bridges. There's a sheriff there who can help you. The toddler at her skirts whimpered, tugging at her dress. Mama, I'm scared. Something in the child's voice seemed to decide matters for her. The revolver lowered slightly. What's your name? She asked. Garrett Calloway. I have a small place about 3 miles east of here. I'm Rebecca Ellsworth, she said. These are my sons, William and James. The baby in her arms began to fuss, his tiny face reddening with the effort of his cries. Rebecca tried to soothe him while keeping her eyes on Garrett, but the gun trembled in her exhausted grip. Ma'am, Garrett said gently, why don't you let me help you? My horse is strong enough to carry you and the little ones. We can be in town before nightfall. Rebecca studied him for a long moment, weighing his words against the danger of trusting a stranger. Finally, she nodded, tucking the revolver into her pocket. I don't have much choice, do I, Mr. Calloway? Just Garrett, ma'am. He knelt down to the toddler's level. Hello there, William. I'm going to help you and your mama get somewhere safe. Would that be all right? The boy regarded him suspiciously before giving a tiny nod. We should go now, Rebecca said, glancing nervously back the way she had come. Those men might return. Yes, ma'am, Garrett stood. If you'll allow me, he gestured toward the toddler. Rebecca hesitated only briefly before nodding. Garrett scooped up William, settling the boy against his hip. The child stiffened at first, then gradually relaxed, one small hand clutching at Garrett's shirt. They made their way back through the forest toward where Garrett had left his mare. Rebecca followed close behind, the baby quieting against her shoulder. When they reached Sadie, Garrett helped Rebecca mount first, passing the baby up to her once she was settled. Then he lifted William up before swinging into the saddle behind them all. Town's that way, he said, pointing west. We'll have to take it slow with all of us on Sadie, but we should make it before dark. Rebecca nodded, her body rigid with tension as she sat before him, holding baby James close. William had ended up sandwiched between them, his small body gradually relaxing against Garrett's chest as they rode. As they traveled, Garrett found himself increasingly aware of Rebecca's subtle floral scent mixing with the earthy smell of the forest. It had been a long time since he'd been this close to a woman, and never one with children. The responsibility felt foreign and uncomfortable, yet there was something about the way William's small head eventually drooped against him in sleep that stirred forgotten emotions. I'm sorry about your husband, Mrs. Ellsworth, he said quietly as they rode through a meadow of late summer wildflowers. Thomas, she said, her voice barely audible over the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. His name was Thomas, she took a shaky breath. We were going to Helena, he bought land there sight unseen, said it would be our fresh start. Garrett remembered the deed in his pocket, but said nothing yet. One piece of bad news at a time seemed sufficient. He was a good man, she continued. We married young, I was 18, he was 26 and full of dreams, wanted to build something that would last. The baby stirred against her chest, and she shifted him gently. Now I don't know what I'll do. We sold everything to make this move. The sheriff in Twin Bridges will help, Garrett assured her, though he knew how hollow such promises could be in frontier country. Help often meant little more than a sympathetic ear and perhaps passage on the next eastbound stage, if you had the money to pay for it. As they approached the outskirts of Twin Bridges, Garrett felt William stir against him. The boy blinked sleepily, looking up with eyes that mirrored his mother's. Are we safe now? The toddler asked. Yes, son, Garrett replied without thinking. You're safe now. Sheriff Martin took their statements with the weary efficiency of a man who had heard too many similar stories. The road agents plaguing the stagecoach lines had grown increasingly bold, and this was the third deadly attack in as many months. "I'll send men out to recover the bodies," the sheriff promised, closing his notebook. "Mrs. Ellsworth, I'm terribly sorry for your loss. The Silver Dollar Hotel has rooms available if you need a place to stay tonight." Rebecca's face paled. I'm afraid I have very little money with me. My husband carried most of our funds, which were likely stolen," the sheriff added grimly. Garrett cleared his throat. "I have something that belongs to you, ma'am." He pulled the folded deed from his pocket. "Your husband gave me this before he passed. Asked me to make sure you got it." Rebecca took the paper with trembling fingers, unfolding it to reveal the deed to 20 acres outside Helena. "Our new beginning," she whispered. "Mrs. Ellsworth," the sheriff said gently, "I'd be happy to wire the authorities in Helena, let them know what's happened. Maybe there's family there who could help." She shook her head. "We know no one in Helena." It was to be a fresh start away from, she stopped abruptly. "We have no connections there." An awkward silence filled the small sheriff's office. William had fallen asleep in a chair, while baby James fussed quietly in Rebecca's arms. "I should see about a room," she finally said, rising unsteadily to her feet. "I'll cover your lodging tonight," Garrett heard himself say, surprising even himself. "It's the least I can do." The relief in Rebecca's eyes was palpable. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway. Your kindness won't be forgotten." After arranging for her room at the Silver Dollar, Garrett intended to leave. His plan was simple: ensure the widow and her children were safely situated, then return to his solitary life. He had done his duty, more than his duty. The smart thing would be to ride away now before he became any more entangled in their lives. Yet as he prepared to depart, William came running up to him in the hotel lobby, his small arms wrapping around Garrett's leg. "Thank you for saving us from the bad men," the boy said, looking up with complete trust in his eyes. Garrett awkwardly patted the child's head. "You take care of your mama now, you hear." Rebecca appeared in the doorway to the stairs, baby James on her hip. "William, come along now, mister. Calloway needs to be on his way." The boy reluctantly released his grip and returned to his mother's side. Rebecca met Garrett's gaze across the lobby. "Will you at least stay for supper?" she asked. "It seems inadequate repayment, but I'd like to thank you properly." Every instinct told Garrett to politely decline and ride away. Attachments were dangerous. Caring for others only led to pain. He had learned that lesson well enough. "Just supper," he found himself saying. "Then I need to head back." One meal became breakfast the next morning, which led to accompanying Rebecca to the undertaker's to make arrangements for Thomas's burial. Each time Garrett decided it was time to leave, something else presented itself. Rebecca needing help with the funeral arrangements, William asking if Mr. Garrett would take him to see the horses at the livery, baby James needing to be held, while Rebecca spoke with the banker about her financial situation. 3 days passed before Garrett finally stood at the edge of town, ready to depart. The funeral had been small but dignified, and Rebecca had secured passage on the northbound stage to Helena, departing the following day. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, standing before him with James in her arms and William holding her hand. "You've been far kinder than any stranger had reason to be." "It was nothing, ma'am, just doing what needed doing." Rebecca studied his face. "What will you do now? Return to your ranch?" Garrett nodded. "Got animals that need tending. Been away too long already." "Of course," she hesitated. "Garrett, may I ask you something?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why did you help us? You could have simply reported what happened and gone on your way." The question caught him off guard. He'd been asking himself the same thing for 3 days. "Your husband made me promise," he said finally. "A dying man's request isn't something to ignore." Rebecca seemed to accept this answer, though something in her eyes suggested she sensed there was more to it. "Well, whatever your reasons, I'm grateful. I don't know what would have become of us otherwise." William tugged at his mother's skirt. "Can Mr. Garrett come with us to Helena?" "No, sweetheart, Mr. Calloway has his own home to look after." She smiled apologetically at Garrett. "Children form attachments quickly." "It's all right." Garrett knelt down to William's level. "You be good for your mama, all right. You're the man of the family now." The boy nodded solemnly, his small shoulders straightening with the weight of responsibility no child should bear. Garrett stood and tipped his hat. "Safe travels to you, Mrs. Ellsworth." "And to you, Mr. Calloway." He mounted Sadie and rode away without looking back, telling himself the hollow feeling in his chest was merely hunger or fatigue. By nightfall, he was back at his cabin, alone with his thoughts and the silence he'd always claimed to prefer. Yet as he sat by the fire that evening, the empty cabin seemed to echo with an absence he'd never noticed before. He found himself wondering if Rebecca and the children had secured a good room for the night, if little William was still asking questions about everything he saw, if baby James was sleeping peacefully. "Not your concern," he muttered to himself, pouring a measure of whiskey. "Not your family, not your problem." But sleep eluded him that night, and the next morning he found himself riding toward Twin Bridges again, telling himself he was just going for supplies, despite the fully stocked shelves in his cabin. The stage to Helena departed at noon. Garrett arrived in town just as the driver was calling for passengers. From across the street, he watched Rebecca struggling to manage her carpet bag, the baby, and keeping track of William all at once. "Last call for Helena," the driver shouted. Rebecca looked overwhelmed as she tried to hand the baby to an elderly woman while she gathered her scattered belongings. William began to cry, frightened by the commotion. Before Garrett could reconsider, he was crossing the street. "Let me help you with that, ma'am," he said, lifting the carpet bag and taking William's hand. The relief in Rebecca's eyes was immediate. "Garrett, I thought you'd return to your ranch." "Needed supplies," he lied. "Saw you were having trouble." With his assistance, Rebecca and the children were soon settled inside the coach. As Garrett handed William up to her, the boy wrapped his arms around Garrett's neck. "Come with us," the child pleaded. "Please." "William," Rebecca chided gently, "Mr. Calloway has his own home to tend to." Garrett carefully untangled the boy's arms. "You look after your mama now, remember." The driver climbed up to his seat. "All aboard who's coming aboard." Rebecca leaned out slightly. "Thank you again, Garrett, for everything." "Safe travels, Mrs. Ellsworth." He stepped back from the coach. As the stage began to pull away, Garrett was struck by an unfamiliar panic. He watched the coach gather speed, carrying Rebecca and her children toward an uncertain future in Helena. He thought of his empty cabin, of the long, silent evenings ahead. He thought of Rebecca arriving in a strange town with 2 small children and no connections. He thought of William's trusting eyes and the feel of baby James's tiny weight in his arms when he'd held him. "Wait," the word tore from his throat before he could stop it. Garrett sprinted after the stage, waving his arms. "Wait." The driver, seeing him in the side mirror, pulled the team to a halt. "You coming along after all, mister?" Garrett reached the coach, breathless. Rebecca was looking down at him, confusion written across her face. "Garrett, what is it?" He faltered, suddenly uncertain of what he was doing. "Helena's not safe for a woman alone with 2 small children. The mining camps bring rough men. You'll need—" "That is," he took a deep breath. "I'd like to escort you at least until you're settled." Hope flickered briefly in Rebecca's eyes before caution reasserted itself. "What about your ranch?" "My neighbor can look after things for a week or so." It was another lie. He had no such arrangement. But Garrett knew he could ride back later and make arrangements. Right now, the only thing that mattered was not watching that stage drive away without him. "Are you certain?" Rebecca asked. "No," Garrett admitted honestly, "but I'm coming anyway." A small smile curved her lips. "Then we would be grateful for your company." The journey to Helena took 3 days, with overnight stops at way stations along the rutted road. During the long hours in the crowded coach, Garrett found himself drawn deeper into the Ellsworth family's orbit. William insisted on sitting beside him, peppering him with endless questions about horses, guns, and whether Garrett had ever fought Indians. Baby James, to everyone's surprise, fussed less when Garrett held him, often falling asleep against his chest while Rebecca gratefully took the opportunity to rest herself. By the time they reached Helena, Garrett had learned much about Rebecca's life. She was 22, the daughter of a Missouri shopkeeper who had died in the war. She'd married Thomas Ellsworth at 18, shortly after her mother's passing left her alone in the world. "Thomas was kind," she explained as they watched the Montana landscape roll by. "Not every man would take on a penniless girl with no family connections." "He was fortunate to find you," Garrett replied, surprising himself with the sincerity behind the words. Rebecca smiled sadly. We had our struggles. Thomas was always chasing the next opportunity. We moved 4 times in 4 years, always seeking something better just over the horizon. She glanced down at baby James, sleeping in her arms. I had hoped Helena would be our final move, the place we could finally build a real home. When they arrived in Helena, they discovered that Thomas had indeed purchased 20 acres of land several miles outside town. But there was no house, no structures at all, just undeveloped terrain near the foothills. He wrote to me that everything was prepared, Rebecca said, staring at the empty land in dismay. The local land agent who had driven them out to the property shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Ellsworth, your husband paid for the land, but the improvements he discussed. Well, there's no record of payment for those. Rebecca's face fell. So there's nothing, no house at all. I'm afraid not, ma'am. Just the acreage itself. Garrett watched as Rebecca struggled to maintain her composure. She stood straighter, adjusting James on her hip while keeping a firm hand on William's shoulder. I see, she said, her voice steady despite the devastation in her eyes. Thank you for showing us the property, Mr. Jensen. Perhaps you could take us back to town now. I'll need to consider my options. In town, the situation grew bleaker. The hotel rooms were exorbitantly priced due to a mining convention, and Rebecca's remaining funds wouldn't stretch more than a few days. The land was her only real asset, but undeveloped property was difficult to sell quickly, especially to a woman with no connections in the area. That evening, Garrett found Rebecca sitting alone in the hotel's small dining room after she had put the children to bed. She was staring into a cup of tea, her expression one of quiet desperation. May I join you? He asked, hat in hand. She looked up, summoning a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course. Garrett sat across from her. Have you decided what you'll do? Rebecca sighed. I have few choices. I can try to sell the land, though Mr. Jensen says I'd get far less than Thomas paid. I could look for work here, but with 2 small children. She trailed off, the impossibility of her situation hanging between them. Or you could return east, Garrett suggested. Is there family who might take you in? No one. Thomas was estranged from his family, and mine is gone. She took a sip of her cooling tea. The truth is, Mr. Calloway, I find myself in the position of having nowhere to go and no means to stay. Garrett studied her face, noting the courage she maintained despite her circumstances. In just a week, he had come to admire her strength, her unwavering devotion to her children, and the grace with which she faced adversity. There is another option, he said slowly, hardly believing the words coming from his own mouth. My ranch, it's small, but the cabin is sound. There's a garden plot that hasn't been planted in years. It's isolated, nothing like town life, but, he paused, gathering his courage. You and the children could stay there. Just until you decide what to do next. Rebecca's eyes widened. Garrett, I couldn't possibly impose. It's not an imposition, he interrupted. The truth is I've been alone a long time, too long maybe. Having you and the boys at the ranch these past days, it wouldn't be a hardship. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Calloway? Rebecca asked carefully. A temporary arrangement, Garrett clarified quickly. You need a place to stay while you decide about the land. I have space, that's all. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You've already done so much for us. Why would you offer this too? It was a fair question, one Garrett had been asking himself since the words left his mouth. Why was he, a man who had spent nearly a decade avoiding attachments, suddenly inviting a widow and 2 small children into his home? I'm not entirely sure, he admitted, but it feels like the right thing to do. Rebecca considered his offer, weighing her limited options against the prospect of moving to an isolated ranch with a man she'd known less than 2 weeks. I would insist on contributing, she said finally. I can cook, clean, tend a garden. I won't be a charity case. Never thought you would be, Garrett replied, and it's just until you find your feet. They returned to Garrett's ranch a week later, after selling Rebecca's Helena property at a modest loss. The long journey was made easier by purchasing a small wagon and team in Helena, allowing them to transport the few belongings Rebecca had brought west, along with supplies for the children. As they crested the final ridge and Garrett's modest homestead came into view, Rebecca fell silent. The cabin was small, the corral in need of repair, the surrounding land beautiful but raw. It was a far cry from the established town she'd expected to call home. "It's not much," Garrett said, suddenly self-conscious about his simple dwelling. "But the roof doesn't leak and the creek nearby has good water year-round." "It's lovely," Rebecca said softly. "Truly." William, who had been dozing in the wagon beside his mother, sat up at the sound of voices. "Is that our new house?" he asked, pointing to the cabin. Before Garrett could correct him, Rebecca squeezed her son's hand. "It's Mr. Calloway's house, dear. We're just staying for a little while." The boy's face fell. "But I want a real home." "We'll have one," Rebecca promised. "Someday soon." Settling into the cabin required adjustments for everyone. Garrett gave Rebecca and the children his bedroom, moving his own bedroll to the main room near the fireplace. The cabin, which had always seemed adequately sized for one man, suddenly felt cramped with 4 occupants, one of whom was a curious toddler constantly underfoot. Yet despite the challenges, Garrett found himself adapting more readily than he would have imagined possible. The solitude he had cultivated for so long gave way to William's endless chatter, baby James's gurgling laughter, and Rebecca's gentle presence. She proved true to her word about contributing. Within days, the cabin was cleaner than it had been in years. She took over the cooking, transforming Garrett's basic provisions into surprisingly tasty meals. She even began turning the long-neglected garden patch, preparing it for late-season planting. "You don't have to work so hard," Garrett told her one evening as she mended one of his shirts by lamplight. The children were already asleep in the bedroom. "I don't mind," she replied, not looking up from her stitching. "Keeping busy helps me not to think too much." "About Thomas?" Rebecca's hands stilled momentarily. "Yes." "And about what comes next?" She set the mending aside, meeting Garrett's gaze directly. "I'm grateful for your hospitality, but I know we can't stay here indefinitely." "There's no rush," Garrett said, surprised by his own reluctance to discuss their departure. "Winter will be here soon. Mountain passes get treacherous. So we should leave before the first snow." "That's not what I meant." Garrett ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "What I'm trying to say is, you're welcome to stay through winter if you want. Travel with small children in cold weather isn't advisable." Rebecca studied him carefully. "That's very generous, but what about you? Surely you didn't anticipate houseguests for months on end when you offered us shelter." Garrett looked around the cabin, noticing the subtle changes that had occurred in just 2 weeks. A handmade rag doll for William sat beside the fireplace. Baby James's tiny clothes hung drying on a line strung across one corner. Rebecca's shawl draped over the back of a chair. Somehow these small additions had transformed his shelter into something warmer, something that felt more like a home than it ever had before. "I don't mind," he said quietly, "having you all here." "It's good." Something shifted in Rebecca's expression, surprise perhaps, or a cautious hope. "Then we accept your offer at least until spring. By then I should have a clearer plan for our future." As autumn progressed, their temporary arrangement developed its own rhythms and routines. Garrett continued his ranch work, mending fences, tending livestock, hunting for winter meat, while Rebecca managed the domestic sphere with quiet efficiency. William followed Garrett whenever permitted, developing a shadow-like devotion to the rancher that both touched and terrified him. "Careful now," Garrett cautioned as the boy attempted to mimic his movements while repairing the corral fence. "That hammer's heavier than it looks." "I'm strong," William insisted, his small face serious with concentration as he clumsily pounded a nail. "Papa said I'm a big boy." "Your papa was right," Garrett agreed, feeling the familiar twist in his chest that came whenever the boy mentioned his father. It was a mixture of sadness for the man who would never see his sons grow up and an uncomfortable awareness that he, Garrett, was stepping into a role he had no right to claim. Yet as the weeks passed, the boundaries between temporary arrangement and something more permanent began to blur. Rebecca started making plans for spring planting that would only bear fruit long after their agreed departure date. Garrett found himself expanding the cabin's single bedroom, adding space for a proper bed for William separate from the cradle where baby James slept. Neither of them acknowledged these contradictions. Maintaining the fiction that come spring, Rebecca would take her children and build a life elsewhere. The first snow fell in early November, a light dusting that melted by midday but served as a reminder that winter was approaching. That evening, As Rebecca rocked baby James by the fire, she broached a subject they had been avoiding. "Garrett, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." He looked up from the bridle he was mending. "What's that?" "The children and we've been attending Sunday services in Twin Bridges when weather permits. I've noticed you never join us." Garrett's hands stilled. "Never been much for church-going." "That's your choice, of course," Rebecca said carefully, "but Christmas is approaching and I was hoping. That is, I wondered if you might accompany us for the Christmas Eve service. It would mean a great deal to William." "To William?" Garrett asked, noting how she deflected her own wishes onto her son. A faint blush colored Rebecca's cheeks. "To me as well. The holidays can be difficult when one has experienced loss." Garrett considered her request. He hadn't set foot in a church since his parents' funeral nearly a decade ago. His relationship with God, if he could call it that, was complicated at best. Yet the thought of Rebecca facing her first Christmas as a widow, trying to create festive memories for her children while grieving her husband, stirred something protective in him. "I'll go," he said simply. Her smile was worth the concession. "Thank you." As December arrived, bringing with it deeper snows and bitter cold, the cabin became a sanctuary of warmth and increasingly comfortable domesticity. Rebecca decorated with pine boughs and dried berries, creating a festive atmosphere despite their limited resources. She baked special treats when flour and sugar allowed, filling the cabin with tantalizing aromas that reminded Garrett of childhood Christmases long forgotten. William grew ever more attached to Garrett, insisting on helping with chores and begging for stories at bedtime. Even more surprisingly, baby James, now nearly 9 months old and attempting his first wobbly steps, had taken to lifting his arms to Garrett whenever he entered the room, a clear demand to be picked up that Garrett found impossible to resist. One evening after the children were asleep, Rebecca worked by lamplight sewing what appeared to be a small shirt. "Christmas gift for William?" Garrett asked, settling into his chair by the fire. "Yes. And I'm making a blanket for James from one of my old dresses." She glanced up at him. "I wish I could do more." "They're too young to remember elaborate gifts," Garrett assured her. "Your love is what matters." Rebecca's hands stilled. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing right by them. Thomas had such dreams for their future education opportunities, and here we are dependent on charity." "This isn't charity," Garrett interrupted, more forcefully than he intended. "This is," he hesitated, unsure how to define what had developed between them. "What is it, then?" Rebecca asked softly. Garrett met her gaze across the room, suddenly aware of how much he had come to care for this woman and her children. How the thought of them leaving in spring created a hollow sensation in his chest. How he had begun to imagine a future that included them permanently. "Family," he said finally, the word feeling both foreign and right on his tongue. "It's what family does for each other." Rebecca's eyes widened, filling with emotions too complex to name. Before she could respond, baby James cried out from the bedroom, breaking the moment. "He's teething," she explained, setting aside her sewing. "I should go to him." Garrett nodded, watching her disappear into the bedroom, the conversation unfinished but something important having shifted between them. Christmas Eve arrived with perfect weather, cold but clear, the snow-covered landscape glistening under a bright moon. They rode to Twin Bridges in the wagon, Rebecca and the children bundled in every blanket Garrett owned. The small church glowed with candlelight, packed with families from surrounding homesteads and ranches. As they entered, Garrett felt uncomfortable under the curious gazes of neighbors who had never seen him in attendance before. More than one eye darted between him and Rebecca, speculation evident in their expressions. Rebecca either didn't notice or chose to ignore the attention, guiding William to a pew near the back while Garrett followed with James in his arms. The baby, dressed in his finest clothes and wrapped in a new blanket, had fallen asleep during the journey and remained peaceful against Garrett's shoulder. Throughout the service, Garrett found himself less focused on the minister's words than on the family beside him. Rebecca sang the hymns in a clear, sweet voice, her profile illuminated by candlelight. William leaned against her, his small face solemn as he tried to follow along in the hymnal despite not yet knowing how to read. And James, warm and trusting in Garrett's arms, occasionally stirred only to settle more comfortably against him. When the final hymn concluded and families began to file out, exchanging Christmas greetings, several people approached them. Most were curious about Rebecca, a newcomer in their small community. "Mrs. Ellsworth and her children are staying with me for a time," Garrett explained repeatedly, conscious of how the arrangement might appear to outsiders. "Such beautiful children," Mrs. Peterson, the blacksmith's wife, commented. "You must be very proud." Before Garrett could correct her assumption, Rebecca touched his arm lightly. "We should start back," she said. "It's getting late and the children need their beds." The ride home was quieter, William dozing against his mother, while James remained asleep in Garrett's arms as he drove the wagon. The moon lit their path, casting the snow-covered landscape in silver light. "Thank you for coming tonight," Rebecca said as the cabin came into view. "I know it wasn't easy for you." "It was fine," Garrett replied, though truthfully, the experience had stirred complicated emotions. Sitting in that church with Rebecca and her children, he had felt an almost painful longing for something he'd never expected to want, a true family of his own. Inside the cabin, they settled the children into bed before returning to the main room, where the fire had burned low in their absence. As Garrett added logs to revive the flames, Rebecca retrieved a small package from her sewing basket. "I have something for you," she said, offering him the carefully wrapped bundle. "It isn't much, but I wanted you to have a gift tomorrow morning." Garrett took the package, surprised and touched by the gesture. "You didn't need to do that." "I wanted to." Her smile was gentle in the firelight. "Merry Christmas, Garrett." He carefully unwrapped the gift to find a knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "Rebecca, this is fine work." "I've noticed your old one is rather worn," she explained. "I unraveled one of my shawls to make it." "The color suits you." The thought of her taking apart her own clothing to create something for him made the gift all the more precious. "Thank you. I have something for you too, though it doesn't seem adequate now." Garrett retrieved a small wooden box from his coat pocket. He'd ridden to Twin Bridges 3 times in secret to commission it from the carpenter, paying more than he could readily afford. Rebecca opened it to find a carved wooden locket on a leather cord. When she pressed the small latch, it opened to reveal tiny portraits of William and James, painstakingly painted by the carpenter's wife from descriptions Garrett had provided. "Oh, Garrett," she whispered, tears filling her eyes as she traced the miniature faces with her fingertip. "It's beautiful, perfect. I thought, since you lost everything in the stage robbery, you might want something to keep them close." Rebecca closed the locket and slipped the cord over her head, the wooden heart resting just below her collarbone. "I'll treasure it always." She hesitated, then stepped forward to place a gentle kiss on his cheek. "Merry Christmas." The touch of her lips lingered on his skin long after she had retired to the bedroom, leaving Garrett to ponder how completely his solitary existence had been transformed in just a few short months. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, William's excited voice waking the household as he discovered the small presents Rebecca had placed by the hearth during the night. The simple gifts, a wooden horse Garrett had carved, the new shirt Rebecca had sewn, a small rag doll for James, delighted the children far more than their modest nature might suggest. They shared a special breakfast of hotcakes with preserved berries, the cabin warm with more than just the heat from the fireplace. For the first time in years, Garrett found himself thinking of his parents, wishing they could have seen this moment, their son surrounded by a family he'd never expected to have. As the winter deepened, bringing January blizzards that sometimes confined them to the cabin for days at a time, the bonds between them strengthened. William now called Garrett Gare and followed him like a devoted puppy. James took his first unassisted steps across the cabin floor, tumbling into Garrett's waiting arms with a triumphant laugh. And Rebecca. The careful distance she had maintained began to dissolve as their shared life created a foundation of trust and mutual respect. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, they would talk by the fire, sharing stories of their pasts and, increasingly, ideas for the future. "The south pasture could support more cattle come spring," Garrett mused one night, "and with a proper irrigation system, we could expand the garden considerably." "Mrs. Peterson mentioned that Twin Bridges needs a seamstress," Rebecca added. "I could take in work once James is a little older. It would provide additional income." Neither acknowledged that these plans extended well beyond their temporary arrangement, the pretense of Rebecca's spring departure becoming thinner with each passing day. February brought a brutal cold snap that tested their resilience. The The temperature dropped so low that the inside walls of the cabin frosted over despite the constant fire. They moved the children's beds into the main room near the fireplace, all of them sleeping in close proximity to share warmth. On the third night of the deep freeze, Garrett woke to find James fussing, his small face flushed with fever. The baby's normally robust cries had weakened to a pitiful whimper that sent fear coursing through Garrett's veins. Rebecca was already awake, pressing a cool cloth to the baby's forehead. "He's burning up," she whispered, her voice tight with worry. "And his breathing sounds wrong." Garrett touched the child's cheek, alarmed at the heat radiating from his skin. "How long has he been like this?" It came on suddenly. He was fine at bedtime. Rebecca's composure cracked slightly. "Garrett, I'm frightened. Thomas's sister lost 2 babies to fever." The fear in her eyes spurred Garrett to action. "We need to get him to a doctor. Bundle him up as warmly as you can." "I'll hitch the team." "The snow." "We'll make it," Garrett said with more confidence than he felt. The snow was deep, the road to town likely impassable in places, and the temperature deadly. But the alternative, watching this child sicken further while they did nothing, was unthinkable. Rebecca nodded, already wrapping James in layers of blankets. "William should stay here. He'll be safer." "He can't stay alone," Garrett protested. "I know," Rebecca said, her expression torn. "But James needs a doctor immediately, and exposing William to this cold." The impossible choice hung between them until Garrett said, "I'll go alone with James." "You stay with William." "No," Rebecca's voice was firm despite her trembling hands. "He's my son. I have to be with him." "Rebecca, listen to me." Garrett gently took her shoulders. "I swear to you I will get him to the doctor safely. You know I would protect him with my life. William needs you here, and attempting this journey with all of us would slow us down when every minute counts." She searched his face, tears freezing on her cheeks in the bitter cold. Finally she nodded, placing James in his arms. "Bring him back to me," she whispered. "I will," Garrett promised. "You have my word." The journey to Twin Bridges was a nightmare of freezing temperatures, deep snowdrifts, and near-blinding darkness. Garrett kept James inside his coat, pressed against his chest for warmth, stopping frequently to check the baby's breathing and temperature. The fever seemed to be rising, the child's whimpers growing weaker with each passing hour. "Stay with me, little one," Garrett murmured against the baby's hot forehead. "Your mama needs you. We all need you." Dawn was breaking when he finally reached town, the doctor's house dark and silent. Garrett pounded on the door until lights appeared and Dr. Marshall opened it, bleary-eyed and irritated until he saw the bundle in Garrett's arms. "Bring him in," the doctor ordered, instantly alert. "How long has he been fevered?" "Since sometime last night," Garrett explained, following him to an examination table. "His breathing's wrong and he's burning up." Dr. Marshall unwrapped the baby, his expression grave as he listened to James's chest with his stethoscope. "Pneumonia," he diagnosed. "It's been going through the settlement. 3 children lost already this winter." Fear gripped Garrett's heart. "Can you help him?" "I'll do everything I can," the doctor promised, already preparing medicines. "But he's very ill, Mr. Calloway. You should prepare Mrs. Calloway for the possibility." "She's not," Garrett began, then stopped. The distinction seemed meaningless in that moment. "She's waiting at home with our other child." "She's very afraid." The doctor nodded in understanding. "You did right to bring him in, despite the risk of the journey. A few more hours and it might have been too late." For 2 days and nights, Garrett rarely left James's side as the baby fought the infection ravaging his tiny lungs. The doctor's treatments, steam, herbal preparations, cool compresses for the fever, seemed to help in small increments, but the child remained dangerously ill. Unable to return home to reassure Rebecca, Garrett sent word with the mail carrier that James was receiving treatment and that they would return when the baby was strong enough to travel. On the 3rd night, the crisis peaked. James's fever soared, his small body racked with coughing that left him limp and gasping. Dr. Marshall worked tirelessly, but as midnight approached, his expression grew increasingly grim. "Talk to him," the doctor advised as he prepared another treatment. "Sometimes they can hear you even in this state. Give him something to fight for." Left alone with the failing child, Garrett gathered James in his arms, rocking him gently as he had seen Rebecca do countless times. "James," he whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion, You need to fight, son. Your mama is waiting for you. William needs his brother. He swallowed hard, his throat tight. And I need you too, more than I ever thought possible. The baby's eyelids fluttered, but he showed no other response. I never expected to love anyone again, Garrett continued, the words flowing more freely in the dimly lit room with no one but the sick child to hear his confession. Spent years convincing myself I was better off alone. Then you and William and your mama came into my life, and everything changed. He brushed a gentle finger over James's flushed cheek. I love you, little one, like you were my own son. And if you stay with us, I swear I'll spend the rest of my life being the father you deserve. I'll teach you to ride, to fish, to be a good man, but you have to fight, please fight. Throughout the night, Garrett continued his vigil, speaking softly to James about the future he imagined for them all. Somewhere near dawn, the baby's fever broke, his breathing easing as he fell into a natural sleep for the first time in days. Dr. Marshall, checking on his patient as the sun rose, confirmed what Garrett already sensed. He's turned the corner, not out of danger entirely, but the worst has passed. Relief left Garrett lightheaded. When can I take him home? Another day to be safe, then travel slowly, keep him warm. The doctor studied Garrett's exhausted face. You should rest, you'll be no good to the boy if you collapse. But Garrett couldn't bring himself to leave James's side, not even for a few hours of sleep. When the baby woke later that morning, his eyes clearer and his cry stronger, Garrett felt a joy so intense it bordered on pain. That's it, son, he encouraged as James managed to take some of the broth the doctor had prepared. Your mama's going to be so happy to see you getting stronger. The following day, with James bundled securely against his chest and specific instructions from Dr. Marshall for his continued care, Garrett began the journey home. The weather had moderated slightly, making travel easier than the desperate ride into town. As the cabin came into view, Garrett saw Rebecca burst through the door, William at her heels. She ran toward them, heedless of the snow, her face transformed by hope and fear. James, she called, reaching for the bundle in Garrett's arms. He's better, Garrett assured her, carefully transferring the baby. The fever broke yesterday. The doctor says he'll recover completely with rest and care. Rebecca unwrapped just enough of the blankets to see her son's face. James, recognizing his mother, gave a weak cry and reached for her. She pressed her lips to his forehead, tears streaming down her face. Thank God, she whispered, and thank you, Garrett, thank you for saving him. William tugged at Garrett's coat. You saved James. Like a hero. Garrett lifted the boy into his arms. The doctor saved him, I just got him there in time. That's what heroes do, William declared with the simple certainty of childhood. Inside the cabin, which Rebecca had kept immaculately clean and warm during their absence, Garrett finally allowed himself to feel the exhaustion of the past days. As Rebecca settled James into his bed for a nap, Garrett sank into a chair by the fire, his body demanding rest now that the crisis had passed. He must have dozed off because he woke to find Rebecca kneeling beside his chair, her hand on his arm. You should sleep properly, she said softly. You're exhausted. Garrett blinked, trying to clear his head. How's James? Sleeping peacefully, his fever hasn't returned. Her eyes, red-rimmed from days of worry and tears, held his. The doctor's wife sent a letter with you. She told me everything, how you never left his side, how you talked to him all night when they thought we might lose him. Garrett looked away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, Rebecca said firmly, not anyone. You love him like your own son. The simple truth of her words hung between them. There was no point denying it. I love both of them, Garrett admitted quietly. And he stopped, uncertain how much to reveal of his feelings for her. Rebecca's hand tightened on his arm. When you rode away with him, I was so afraid, not just for James, but for you too. I realized that if anything happened to either of you, it would break my heart beyond repair. The implication of her words sent hope coursing through him. Rebecca. Let me finish, she said, her voice trembling slightly. When Thomas died, I thought I would never feel whole again. I was lost, terrified for my children's future, unsure how I would survive. Then you found us, and everything changed. She took a deep breath. These past months with you, I've come to care for you deeply, Garrett, more than I thought possible. The way you are with the boys, the kindness you've shown us, the man that you are, it's impossible not to love you. Garrett stared at her, scarcely believing what he was hearing. "You love me." A smile touched her lips. Yes, though I've been afraid to admit it even to myself, it seemed too soon after Thomas, too complicated with the children. "It is complicated," Garrett agreed. "But that doesn't change how I feel. I love you, Rebecca, and I love William and James as if they were my own. The thought of you leaving in spring." "I don't want to leave," she confessed. "Not unless you want us to go." Garrett reached for her hand, drawing her closer. "I want you to stay, all of you, forever if you'll have me." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Garrett Calloway?" "I'm asking if you'll marry me," he said, the words feeling right despite his long-time conviction that he would never speak them. "I'm asking if you'll let me be a father to your boys, a husband to you. If you'll help me turn this small ranch into a real home for our family." Rebecca's answer came not in words but in the gentle press of her lips against his, their first kiss, tender and full of promise. When she drew back, her eyes shone with happiness. "Yes," she whispered, "yes to all of it." Spring arrived with the gradual greening of the Montana landscape, bringing new life to the ranch and to the newly formed Calloway family. They were married in early April by the minister in Twin Bridges, a simple ceremony attended by the few neighbors Garrett had come to know in his years of isolation, and the many new friends Rebecca had made during her months in the community. William, delighted by his official new status as Garrett's son, proudly carried the rings on a small cushion Rebecca had sewn. James, fully recovered from his illness and growing stronger each day, watched the proceedings from Mrs. Peterson's arms, occasionally babbling what sounded suspiciously like gaga whenever Garrett spoke. As spring turned to summer, the ranch transformed under their combined efforts. Garrett expanded the cabin, adding a proper second bedroom and a larger kitchen for Rebecca. The garden flourished under her care, providing vegetables for their table and extra to trade in town. The south pasture, as Garrett had predicted, proved ideal for the small herd of cattle he acquired through trade with a neighboring rancher. By late summer, their happiness was made complete when Rebecca shared the news that they would welcome a new baby in the winter, a child that would join William and James in their growing family. On a warm evening in August, as the setting sun painted the mountains in gold and purple, Rebecca found Garrett on the porch, watching William chase fireflies in the yard, while James practiced his steadier walking skills nearby. "Everything all right?" Garrett asked, noting her thoughtful expression as she settled beside him on the porch steps. "Perfect," she assured him, leaning against his shoulder. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in a year. Last summer I was following Thomas to yet another new beginning, uncertain and afraid, despite his promises that Helena would finally be our home." She placed a hand over her still flat stomach. "Now I'm here with you, truly home at last. The boys are thriving. We're expecting a baby. It's more happiness than I ever dared hope for." Garrett slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her closer. "Sometimes I still can't believe you're all really here, that this is our life now." "Believe it," Rebecca said, smiling up at him. "We're not going anywhere." William came running up, his hands cupped around a captured firefly. "Look, Pa. I caught the biggest one." The title Pa still filled Garrett with a mixture of pride and humility each time the boy used it. "That's a fine catch, son. Remember to let it go before you come inside, though." James, seeing his brother's excitement, abandoned his careful walking to crawl rapidly toward them, his preferred method of covering ground quickly. Reaching the porch, he pulled himself up on Garrett's knee, demanding attention with an imperious, "Up." Laughing, Garrett lifted him with one arm while keeping the other around Rebecca. With one child on his hip and the other darting around the yard in pursuit of more fireflies, he felt a contentment so complete it almost frightened him. Rebecca seemed to sense his thoughts, for she turned to press a kiss to his cheek. "You look happy," she observed. "I am happy," Garrett confirmed. "Happier than I ever thought possible." James squirmed to be put down, eager to join his brother's firefly hunt. As Garrett set him on his feet, the boy took several wobbly steps before plopping down in the grass with a delighted giggle. Rebecca watched her sons with eyes full of love before turning back to her husband. "You know, when we first met, I was so lost. Thomas was gone, the children were so small, and I had nowhere to turn." "You would have found your way," Garrett said, believing it completely. You're the strongest person I know." She shook her head, perhaps. "But the truth is, until you came into our lives, I felt completely alone in the world." She took his hand, placing it over her heart. "Then you carried one baby on your hip and the other in your arms, and somehow I knew everything would be all right." Garrett remembered that day clearly, William clinging to him as they fled the forest, James wailing in Rebecca's arms, all of them strangers bound only by circumstance and a dying man's request. "I never planned to care about anyone again," he admitted. "Spent years convincing myself I was better off alone, then I heard those gunshots and everything changed." "For the better?" Rebecca asked, though she knew the answer. Garrett pulled her close, his gaze taking in the cabin they had made into a home, the land that now supported their family, and the two small boys playing in the yard, soon to be joined by another child of their own. "For the better," he confirmed, kissing her softly. "I thought I wanted solitude, but what I needed was you, all of you." William came running back, James crawling determinedly behind him. "Pa, Mama, look. More fireflies." As the evening deepened into twilight, Garrett found himself with James dozing against his shoulder, while William leaned heavily against his side, fighting sleep as he pointed out constellations Garrett had taught him. Rebecca sat close, her head resting on his other shoulder, one hand absently stroking her stomach where their child grew. "We should get these boys to bed," she murmured, though she made no move to disturb the peaceful tableau. "In a minute," Garrett said, wanting to hold on to this perfect moment just a little longer. Rebecca seemed to understand, for she simply snuggled closer. "I love you," she whispered. "And I love you," Garrett replied, "all of you." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Garrett Calloway held his family close, marveling at how completely his life had transformed. The man who had once believed himself destined for solitude now found himself surrounded by love, his heart fuller than he had ever imagined possible. The night grew cooler, finally prompting them inside. As Garrett carried the sleeping James while Rebecca guided the drowsy William, she looked back at him with a smile that held all their shared hopes and dreams. "You know," she said softly, "for years I searched for a place that felt like home. I never realized it wasn't a place I was looking for at all." Garrett understood exactly what she meant. Home wasn't the cabin they had built together or the land that sustained them. It was this, the family they had created, the love that had found them when neither was looking for it. As he settled James into his bed and kissed William goodnight, Garrett thought about the lonely man he had been just 1 year ago. That man could never have imagined the joy that awaited him, the fulfillment that would come from loving and being loved in return. Later, as he and Rebecca lay together in the quiet darkness, her head resting on his chest, Garrett whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" she asked sleepily. "For finding me, for showing me that I wasn't meant to be alone." Rebecca reached up to touch his face gently. "We found each other," she corrected, "and none of us will ever be alone again." In the peaceful quiet of their home, with the soft sounds of their children sleeping nearby and the promise of their future growing within Rebecca, Garrett finally understood the truth that had eluded him for so long. The frontier wasn't a place meant only for solitary survival. It was a place where love could take root and flourish, where a family could build something lasting together, where a man could find his true purpose in the hearts of those who loved him. And as sleep claimed him, Garrett's last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought him to that stagecoach on a summer day, forever changing the course of his life.